Awesome. Welcome, everyone, to Microsoft Ignite for the Azure Functions live webcast. We're very excited to be here at the podcast studio here at Ignite. I'm Jeff Holland. I'm a Senior Program Manager for Azure Functions. We're joined by a familiar face, hopefully.
I'm Eduardo Laureano, PM Lead for Azure Functions.
Yeah. And I'm Fabio Cavalcanti, one of the developers on the Azure Functions team.
Yeah, perfect. We're really excited to have this live webcast today from this wonderful studio. You can see we've really upped our game in the last few webcasts, and no technical hiccups this time. Last month we spent the first, 5 minutes.
I know, every webcast we get one level up. Like this
I know.
Yeah, it's going up. I want to see what's next.
Next we're coming from NBC Nightly News studios. We'll just be broadcasting. So we've got a really fun show planned for you today. Obviously, there's tons of announcements that we've been talking about all week with Azure Functions and with serverless, so we're going to cover those. Fabio and Eduardo, I've been on Twitter today.
Yeah.
All I am hearing is about this session. It's making me jealous because I wasn't listed as a speaker, but you gave a session this morning.
That's right. Yeah.
Titled.
We did decide to do something a little bit crazy, different than what normally do. So there was no marketing slides. It was all under the covers, how things work, and going deep into the details and demoing things that are working now with 2.0 and things that are coming soon.
Right. Yeah, so we'll share because we know some of you weren't able to see that, and even though there will be a recording, we want to make sure that you all get the chance. We're going to give you Fabio's ready. I told him, how long ago did I tell you need to do the exact same demos for all of our live viewers?
About 10 minutes ago.
And after I caught up with him from running outside, he agreed. So we will get right to it. We've got a good amount of viewers watching us. Everything seems to be going well. So why don't we start with the announcements? Eduardo, I don't know. What's one of the things that we should highlight? You wrote the awesome blog post.
Yeah.
Azure Functions 2.0. Speaking of marketing, everyone that one was full of it, but it was good. So Eduardo, why don't you start giving us a little bit of an insight on what this is?
Oh man, there's so much with 2.0, but talking about the conference starting right on Monday. We're watching the Scott Guthrie keynote.
Oh, this is where this is going.
And then, what's your new name again? I heard there's
from
a new
Christina.
name.
Yeah, I was here yesterday. Christina gave me the name Mr. Serverless.
Mr. Serverless. So he showed up. With
I
Scott
can't lie.
Guthrie.
I was pretty flattered. I'm not against it. I'm not against it.
But it was awesome that you built that live on stage and announced to the world that Functions 2.0 was out, because for the viewers of this webcast, they're very familiar. It's a long time coming, but we really delivered. Came with so many features, and the reception at the conference has been amazing.
It's been great. Well, it's good to finally have you here, right? It's been a while. People have been waiting for it, so.
How's your work-life balance been the last month, Fabio, would you say?
Not great, I'll be honest with you. I want to say hi to my wife and kids.
I haven't seen you for a while. Honestly, I sit next to Fabio and his loud mechanical keyboard, and he's been working, the whole team has been really working hard, but it's shown, there's some awesome stuff here. It's .NET Core 2.1. That's my favorite thing. Performance improvements that have come along with that.
Yep.
Absolutely.
There was a fun moment today, my favorite moment that I actually tweeted about, Fabio, where you took your favorite issue. You want to give the viewers a little bit of a feed into that 2.0 feature?
I don't know if I'd call it my favorite, but yeah, it's one that I know by heart. Right?
Issue 992.
992, yeah. We don't know many of those by number. But, yeah, on the team, we all know this particular issue by number. We spent a lot of time working on this.
What is 992?
So that was the issue that we used to track all of the assembly resolution, assembly binding issues in V1, collect all of the feedback, collect repros, and just gather information, provide workarounds. So if you go to the issue, it's a long one. We spent a lot of time talking to people and just working off of the information that we collected there.
And then during the demo, live on stage, I never saw this. When we were playing here, I was like, are you really going to close an issue in front of everyone?
You can't rehearse that one either. You do it live.
You have one shot, yeah.
So, and he did it, yeah.
And everyone loved it. They were all clapping. It's been a journey.
I'm taking that as approval, that they were okay with me closing the issue, so.
So we closed the assembly resolution issue, which has been one, even on this webcast, I think every single month there's a question of, what do I do about assembly conflicts that I have in my functions? In V2, that stuff goes away, honestly. We've closed the issue. There's a nice comment there if you want to go follow out. Issue 992. Hopefully we'll forget that number.
Yeah, and there was a lot of other stuff that was great too. Like, we forget that 2.0 was not only about the runtime. Obviously, runtime was the main thing, but I love the new quick starts, to be honest. Like, so many people, they started with functions, they start on the portal. They're not even aware there is like Visual Studio Code, that you can do DevOps. There's all this world out there that they don't find out. So now we made it easy. Like, whether you do Java or Node, you can just start there, get the quick start, tells you exactly what to do, and for you to be successful.
Yeah, there has been a lot of pretty amazing work happening from all the different teams surrounding functions, not just the core team, but from tooling, and also we're benefiting from a lot of the amazing work done by the app service folks with the feature like what you showed with the run from package.
Run from package, yeah.
So some pretty amazing things to look at now that V2 is out. Both directly coming from functions as well as just related to functions and some of the partner teams.
And talking about contribution, the other stuff we like is all these bindings are coming together now. Like,
yeah.
Well, durable functions, I guess, are our most famous one. We keep evolving, and it's GA with our GA, but we get the SignalR stuff that Anthony showed, and that was fantastic. Now we can have all this fancy UI that can be updated live because now we have support for SignalR and WebSockets under the cover. So that was cool too.
Yeah, the service is pretty amazing, and to see how quickly the team was able to put that together as well. In no time, they had a binding set up, and now you can actually combine the SignalR service and Azure Functions. He had some pretty amazing demos here at Ignite as well.
That honestly is a really good example, too, because that started off with Anthony wanting to have a SignalR binding, so he just created his own repo and built this thing out. Talk to us, talk to the SignalR team, and now it's an official like Microsoft.Azure.WebJobs extension for SignalR, and it's really powerful. Eduardo, you were mentioning to me ahead of time, he built a cool demo around it for one of Scott Hanselman's sessions too. What's this demo that he did?
He built a few demos. One that I particularly like is one that gets live flight data and can plot that on the map, so you can see the planes sort of moving around and where they are. So it's really fun. He does another one where you get quiz and you can answer the trivia question.
That's the one
live.
I played. Yeah, the Jeopardy one. I got every single question wrong, but it was real time. I was real time wrong.
And multiple people can connect to that one, but just show the different contributions we're getting on the work we've done, the foundation on extensibility of bindings that people can leverage. The bindings can be revved independently without breaking because of the whole assembly loading thing, and just what V2 unleashes is, I think, what I'm excited about. Like, the next things are going to come. And there are a few more things. Did you watch some of the Python sessions?
I did, because I was out yesterday. That was yesterday, right?
So you didn't go to your.
Unbelievable.
Well, maybe let's talk to Fabio about that.
I was too busy writing the Jungle Cruise at Disney World's Magic Kingdom. No, I missed it though. So what was this Python?
You watched
Fabio?
One of them with me, right?
I did. Savri did a great job showing that, and it's just exciting for me to see some of the demos with the language workers using the new language extensibility features, and how you can actually provide an experience that feels native to that developer, that uses the tool set that they're familiar with. It's pretty exciting to see that. I'll highly recommend going back to the streams and look at Savri's demo. She had 2 sessions covering that.
That's true. Yeah.
So it's worthwhile going back and checking that out.
Is there a call to action with the Python stuff too?
Yeah. What we should say, there are actually 2, because what you can do with Python now, you can run a serverless workload, and that runs now on Linux consumption mode, which is powered by Service Fabric Mesh. So it really shows that, like, again, 2.0, .NET Core allows you to run on multiple OSs. You can now build things as a container, put that on top of Service Fabric Mesh instance that's running Linux, and this all works. It's kind of like magic, because if you're a developer, all you're doing is coding your Python script, bringing up your dependencies. We do everything else for you, and then now you can preview Python. There's a link to sign up, and you can preview Linux consumption as well. So we're super excited about those. Those are the up-and-coming things.
Makes sense. So that's Python 3.6 right now.
Right.
Yep.
Also, V2 came with Node versions 8, 10.11.1 and Node 10. Whatever Node 10 is right now. I heard you mention today, Eduardo, in your session something about another language as well. Am I teasing this one out of you?
We couldn't, to be honest, we came last year to Ignite, right? And we knew exactly which question was going to be asked at this conference.
The IT Professionals Conference.
So we knew people are doing tons of rich, cool automation scenarios. People use more and more Azure, and they need to manage their infrastructure. There's so many automation scenarios out there that we started investing on PowerShell. So if you actually go to our GitHub, you can see the work on the PowerShell worker.
I'm just applauding. That's a big one. PowerShell functions.
Yeah, and our last session remaining at the conference, if you're watching this later, we're on Thursday, so tomorrow, Friday, I think 10 a.m., 10:45, Colby has a session with Eamon talking about all the automation options you have in Azure, including functions, logic apps, runbooks. So
wow,
that's
nice.
really exciting.
Very, very cool. And I'll just do a quick plug, too. We've still even got more with V2 to cover. Functions 2.0. We haven't talked about App Insights, Key Vault, some of that stuff, too.
Oh, that's right.
The Azure Functions Premium Plan. But just to plug, too, if you're watching this right now, you might notice if you're on the YouTube channel that there's a chat window to the right-hand side. Go ahead and ask your questions as well. And coming up in a few minutes, we'll start answering some of your questions, too. So with that, this is a feature Alex, who's on our team, who isn't able to come here, that he worked on.
Yep.
This was a demo that I didn't build, that I got to present, that has been probably one of my favorite things to come from this
It's the
conference.
shiniest demos, I think, from our team at this conference. In terms of visual
It's shiny, it's visual, but it's not just fluff, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's actually really useful information and really helpful.
So with that setup, the demo is with Application Insights, which is pretty much turned on by default. And I even looked at his code. All he's doing is he's using the service bus queue triggers and the service bus queue output bindings. And we've worked with the App Insights team so that we'll automatically correlate the calls across different functions through queues. And then Application Insights has this feature called the App Map, where you click on the App Map, and now it gives you like this visual representation where it's like the message started, function A took it, dropped in a queue, function B picked it up. So during the demo, I can actually click in at like the fifth step of some order process, find an exception, and trace back all of the executions where this message was touched or manipulated, and it just worked out of the box.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, so that App Map thing with Application Insights, it's just getting started, but I think Alex mentioned it works for Service Bus triggers and Service Bus bindings, and also HTTP triggers, where we'll automatically do the correlation, assuming you're setting the right headers and stuff. So some cool stuff there.
That's
really
really
cool
fantastic,
stuff, yeah.
And it's funny because a bunch of us go to the serverless conferences, and the themes is always like security, observability seems to be the hot ones right now. So observability, I had the presentation, was right after 2 observability sessions, was like, distributed tracing is such a hard problem, nobody can solve it. And I was like, okay, have you guys heard of AppMap?
So he pulled out a mic from his pocket and
yeah.
dropped it right there.
So yeah, kudos to also Brett, Ludmila. There is a bunch of people that worked on this thing too.
Right.
So it's exciting to see. So what about security? I hear that's something in serverless people care about.
Can I say every feature was like my favorite one? And Phil, a tease as well to stick on this webcast. In a few minutes, I'm going to have Fabio give us a live demo of dependency injection in Azure Functions. That's a tease. So that might be my favorite. But I'm going to set you up. I'm going to let you boil on it for a little bit while I talk about security, because Matthew Henderson has been working on some awesome features.
That's true.
And one of the things that he demoed during our session is integration with Azure Key Vault automatically. So I've worked with this before. I even posted a blog post where it's like, hey, here's how you can use your functions managed identity and go get a secret from Key Vault. But it was still limited in that it wouldn't work for triggers. It wouldn't work for binding connection strings. So now there's a way that's going out very soon where you can, as your setting for that trigger or binding connection string, you can point it to Key Vault. And Key Vault will automatically give that secret back to you and let you run in your function. So you don't have to worry about having your connection strings in an app setting, even though they're encrypted, whatever. I'm not going to go into it. But it's nice, too, if you have a same secret that's shared across multiple apps, Now you just have to keep that secret in one spot and then point everything to that one spot.
So soon enough, all your secrets in a single place. Key vault. You need to keep no secrets in your function app. Even secrets like the infrastructure uses, like the connection to app insights or connection to storage.
Right.
All of that goes away. You manage them all in Key Vault. I think that's our number one user voice ask.
It is. Yep. Key Vault integration.
The cool thing about that is that aside from setting the reference in your app settings, zero application or configuration changes.
Yeah.
So it just works as soon as you update that.
That's very cool. Yeah, so you could take an existing app, and once this goes out, not touch the code, not even do a redeployment,
right.
Just change where the connection stream is coming from, and everything would still work.
That's right.
Yeah, that's a really good call out.
You just need managed identities to be configured on your function apps for that to work, which is another feature we have enabled for web apps and function apps.
Very cool.
Powerful stuff, security.
All right, so since I already teased it, let's answer 2 quick questions, and then we'll go back to dependency injection, because it's like American Idol, where it's going to be like, and after this break, we'll announce the dependency injection. Okay, first question. I'll throw it out there. Someone can answer it. Okay, this is I'll ask this one. I'm just going to read this. I'm not even filtering these. I'm hoping they're filtered before I ask them. So what happens?
Does it have proper language, though?
It does.
Okay.
Oded's adding a backstage, so hopefully he doesn't.
He removed all the bad stuff.
All right, so what happens on deployment of running triggered or timed functions? Does it wait or go to the poison queue? What happens on deployment of running triggered or timed functions? Do you know what this might be alluding to? We might need clarification, Dan, on this one.
Yeah.
Do you have another one?
I'm guessing a few things, but I don't want to assume.
Yeah. It depends, I guess, is the answer. So we'll keep going. Eric asked a good question. He actually asked this on Twitter. So in V2, this is a good question that Fabi and I have become very familiar with. Is V2 better for scaling or splitting functions across multiple projects, or does V2 make any changes into both how my function scales or how many functions I might have in the same app? So there's some good questions in there. I guess Fabio, I'll start. Do you have any thoughts on kind of what might be the changes that would impact you related to V2 in terms of how your app is scaled or how you package multiple apps together?
Well, I think you've kind of touched on it a little bit from a performance perspective, right? So we did see some significant performance improvements with the move to .NET Core and some of the core changes that we made to the runtime as well. So combining those two things, we're seeing better performance, which translates that it does have impact on scaling.
Yeah.
For combining, I have some thoughts on how V2 impacts combining functions and how you may want to redesign or combine the different functions into different function apps. For HTTP, it depends a lot on the workload as well, right?
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
So
it's worth clarifying that the V2 changes are the ones we're talking about. They're runtime changes, right? It's
right.
When the function's running on the runtime means it's already on a worker. It already has a VM for it. There's a lot of the scale logic that happens on a different component. Scale controllers, what we call it, and that's completely outside. That's the one that listens to those events and decides how many VMs to use, how many functions to run in parallel. That part is not a part that we actually V2 necessarily touched. We keep improving that component, but it's not part of what we call Functions 2.0.
And that's definitely worth mentioning because there will be impact to customers depending on the hosting model we decided to use, right? So I think our dedicated customers may see significantly different results than consumption customers would see at this point.
That's a very good point.
Yeah.
Because of what you just mentioned. The dedicated, we don't have the scale controller in front of it, so you're in charge of how you scale, how many VMs you allocate, and you may see a bigger impact from switching to V2 than consumption customers would see because they are going through that infrastructure piece, that infrastructure layer that has that is the scale controller, that is making some of the scaling decisions there. And we didn't change that significantly with the V2 release, though we are always enhancing that product. So all of the enhancements benefit V1 and V2 customers. But with some of the changes that we saw in V2 specifically, I would assume we would be making some changes to the scale controller to better deal with the way V2 behaves when compared to V1.
Yeah, and put differently, if I understand right, too, like in V1, let's say if I was using a dedicated plan or an app service plan, and to handle, whatever, 100 requests per second, I needed to have 3 instances running because V1 took, a certain amount of time to respond. Right. It had a certain memory footprint. But with V2, because the performance is better, it's a lighter memory footprint, I might only need 1 instance or 2 instances to perform the same amount of work. On consumption plan, where we're dealing with the scaling, it's like they don't really have to worry about that because that's one of the values of serverless. Yeah. But if you are using the app service plan, that might impact you definitely to be aware of that. You might get more done with less.
Exactly. That's why it's a little tricky to answer the questions because it depends on the workload. It depends on the plan you're on. But I do expect to see benefits across the board, but the customers on dedicated may see bigger benefits right now, or may translate into direct benefits impacting them more than consumption customers would right now.
Scaling is such an interesting topic. I was talking to Fabio about it, that I wonder the same deep dive we did on the runtime today, if future conference we should do one that we just focus on scaling. So, folks can really get into it. The folks watching the webcast, if you like that idea,
Yeah, we need to bring folks
like
Chris
on Twitter. No, seriously. Like yesterday, Max, who's a CDA, he's been doing some awesome stuff with durable functions.
Oh, that's true.
Worth calling out there. But I spent the day with him yesterday at this Java conference I was at, and I started talking to him about the scale controller and how the scaling works, and he was like so fascinated by it. He's like, I had no idea that you had this thing that like listens to my queue and decides how many instances it needs. So that definitely is something, the same way you did the internals of the runtime.
Absolutely. And
there's some cool stuff there.
And you could differentiate and explain HTTP. We made tremendous progress, and we can show how that works and how that's different than a regular event. Because
will you invite me to help with this one, or is it still just you two?
I think we need to put the devs to work on it.
I just want to give a really good 400 level. It's fine. I'll catch up with you guys later. Don't worry about it.
You need Chris in some of those folks. Talk about scaling.
I think let's call Chris by name and see if Chris can be the one showing that.
That's true. Chris Gillum is both the mastermind behind the scale controller and the mastermind behind durable functions.
Yep.
So
he's in Japan
name.
Right now.
That's right. At Serverless Conf Japan. Always some cool stuff. All right. So I guess I'll leave it up to you. We've still got a bit of time. We are going to make this a longer webcast because we have such comfy seats and we have such bright lights that we got to take advantage of it. So we can answer a few more questions. In fact, Dan also clarified we could go into the Azure Functions Premium plan, go into dependency injection. You have a preference, Eduardo?
Let's do the demo, or you want to keep the build up and do it towards the end?
We've made them wait 30 minutes at this point. So I guess, Fabio, do you want me to introduce this at all? Do you want to just take it away and show what you've got running?
I'll leave it up to you.
Okay. I will give this a nice spin.
You were the one excited about it.
I was. Because I didn't see the rehearsals for this because I was gone. I assume you did this with Matthew yesterday when he was saying he saw the rehearsals, or did you just not invite me to that one?
Let's not even go there.
I heard you did a rehearsal to some people, so I didn't know this was coming. So I was sitting there today, and I will say, because I've been doing some work over the last few months on testing and DevOps with Azure Functions. It's one of the things we presented on. Because I honestly, I'll freely admit this, I'm a very much beginner when it comes to some advanced concepts like dependency injection. I hadn't really ever heard of it much before when I was with Logic Apps because everything's drag and drop designer. But when I was trying to do some of these tests, I realized, there's a lot of value in having these be dependencies you can inject in. You can easily mock them. And I understood why, pretty much during every webcast, someone says, how do I do dependency injection with Azure Functions? And there's been some people who've made some creative ways to do it, but it's never really been like an endorsed first-class way. So Fabio today, and I'll caveat this too for you, this is a proof of concept, but it's definitely a proof of concept that we plan on coming in the not-too-distant future. Like, we're not talking the V2 preview time frame. We're talking like weeks and months. Before people might get their hands on this kind of thing.
Functions 3.0.
Right.
Yeah, we never, that is words that will never come out of our mouths ever again.
Yeah,
some of the work is people watching.
Yeah, some of the SDK is already there at this point to help with that. Because we have and we've had a bunch of talking about dependency. during the session, but WebJobs is G8 as well. So
yes.
It's not just functions, but WebJobs 3.0.
Tweet about WebJobs G8 too, everyone.
WebJobs 3.0 is
See,
out.
there is a 3.0. It's a WebJobs.
But WebJobs customers can take advantage of that already. But a lot of customers, a lot of people watching the functions repo, they were asking, so hey, I see all these DI-related changes, but I don't see how I can benefit that. So we're benefiting from that when working on the runtime, but that's also paving the way for us to expose that feature as a customer-facing feature and something that is supported in functions. So that's why I wanted to show this to answer that question. People are asking why all of this work is happening and I don't see anything surfacing into functions land. So that is just to give you a little taste of how things will likely be working when everything is said and done. So some changes may still happen. It's just, again, a demo to show the direction we are going. But it's something that's going to be landing very, very soon.
Sweet, awesome. So we'll switch to the feed from your laptop, Fabio, and you can just walk us through the sample you built together.
Sure.
When I say together, I mean you by yourself.
Are we?
It should show. Yeah, they'll switch to it. Yeah.
Okay.
They're seeing it now.
Okay, I just want to make sure you're not missing this, Jeff, because you were excited. But what I have here is just a function project. So just the standard VS project for functions, for Azure Functions. I started out with just an HTTP trigger. So what I have here is pretty much the HTTP trigger. But if you look at it closely, you're going to notice a couple of differences. The first one is that this run method is not a static method. Right, so this is an instance method that I have defined here. This is not a static class, and we have a constructor here defined that is taking a dependency on this service, this my service that I have defined here, this interface. If we look at it, this is also an interface that I have defined in my project, and I have an implementation of that interface, as simple as it gets, just exposes a property that gives us an ID. So every time you create an instance of the service, you're going to get a new GUID, you're going to get a new ID returned by that property. All my function is doing, if you look at this class, we're taking that in the constructor. We're using this. Let me actually remove this additional parameter here. This is something that we'll show you in a minute. But we are taking an instance of the service. We are saving that as a local here, as an instance variable, and we are using that when we invoke the function, showing both an instance ID that I assign when an instance of my function class is created, as well as the ID of the service. Okay.
So now you could bring up, it could be Jeff's service. So you can bring up your own service. The runtime has no knowledge of any of that, and now you can use that in the functions dynamically.
So the other piece of that, so that's the consumption, right? So we're consuming that service from our function class. And this piece that I have in front of me here is how we are registering this service. So just using the same APIs that you're used to in ASP.NET Core, in .NET Core, the dependency injection APIs, we're registering that service as a singleton. So I'm just saying here, hey, if anyone asks for my service, this is the implementation that I want to pass in. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this.
You're getting a good reaction in the chat, by the way, Fabio. Just so you know, I know you can't see the crowd, but
right.
They're very excited to see a goodbye to static methods and some questions there too. So very cool. You running this? Oh yeah, I see.
Yeah,
it.
so we're running this. Everything just identical to what the experience you would see from a regular HTTP function. I'm just going to grab that URL, and we're going to do that in the browser. I had Postman open here a second ago, but we're just going to invoke that function, and we just hit that breakpoint. And what you're going to see here is that we have an instance of that service being passed in. We can pick at the ID, but we're going to see that in the response. I'm going to remove this breakpoint here so we can invoke this function a few times, because the interesting bit here, if we switch back to the browser, is you will notice that I have my instance ID, which is that GUID that I was assigning every time I create an instance of my function class.
Yep.
But I also have the service ID. My expectation here, based on how we've registered that service, is that I'm going to have a new instance of that class every single time I invoke this function. So you see that that ID is going to change every time, while my service ID remains static. So the same instance of that service will be passed into every instance of that function that's being executed by the runtime.
That's very cool. It is a very powerful demo, honestly. A few questions while we're on it, and I'll just ask. So everyone's really excited with how clean it looked, and I will give you props on this, Fabio. Your code looks very clean, which is good. Everyone really likes how that looks. They're fans of DI. One of the questions was similar to how you have kind of your service instantiation with the startup. Would there be a similar way, or is there a needed way to shut down, like to potentially deregister your services or disconnect as you would? Would that be in the scope of this? Is that something totally different?
I want to make sure I understand that. So for shutdown, for cleanup, this already works out of the box, right? So if your service implements iDisposable, dispose is going to get called at the end of the life. The lifetime of that service is going to be managed for you. In this particular case, we had a singleton service, so it's going to live for the life of that container, which in the context of functions, it is the life of the job host. So what that means, just to make sure the terminology is clear, is that if you make a change that requires a job host restart, that would be a configuration change. You've added a function to your function app.
Change an app setting, whatever.
Change an app setting.
Yeah.
That will cause a job host restart. That will dispose of the existing services that had been instantiated. New services will stand up, so you can
through
go
calling the dispose method. So as long as you
correct, just by implementing the interface, that will happen automatically.
Makes sense.
For additional shutdown hooks for you to understand whether the job host itself is shutting down. So if you want to perform some additional
send a
tasks,
notification or whatever,
something along those lines, when that is happening, there are services you can consume that will give you that information. And that's one of the things that we were discussing earlier today. Before we can light this feature up, it's not just giving you a place for you to register your services. I think that ties into what I'm about to show here with some additional DI features that this would enable as well. But we have some work to do when it comes to documentation as well. We need to document services that you can actually take a dependency on, what they are, what they give you, how you can use those services, their lifetime, so you understand how you can actually leverage those services from within your function. And so it's not just engineering work that needs to happen in order for us to expose this. There is some work on you too.
I was just going to say, I can hear exactly where the sentence is finishing, and it's we need someone to write docs, and apparently that's going to be me. No, this is super helpful. And honestly, again, I'll just say we've had a very engaged audience during this webcast, really positive reaction towards that, and very clear explanation. So did you say you wanted to show the configuration thing too?
There's a little bit more power to this.
I think it ties into what you were just what we were just talking about. Like if you want to use some functionality that is coming from other services, web job services, we expose a lot of stuff in web jobs that they're very helpful to functions customers. I give you a little more information about how the job host is actually set up, how things are running. So I'll give you a quick example of that with configuration, which is something that we've heard a lot from customers. Hey, what's the recommended way for me to check a specific config setting? Should I be checking an environment variable? Should I be doing something different? So I'm just going to show here an example of us taking, in addition to the service that we just registered. So we have a custom service. We're combining this with a service that's not coming from us. It's a service that's going to be fulfilled by the runtime. We are registering this. This is the same configuration that is seen throughout all of the services that we set up for you. So let's go ahead and run this, and you will see that just like our service, we're going to get an instance of a configuration. I shouldn't have closed my browser. We're going to get an instance of a configuration object passed into our function, and that's going to come pre-populated. That will contain all of the information that comes from app settings, host JSON, your local settings JSON when developing locally, all of the different configuration settings that are injected into your environment when running on Azure. If we look here, we see that we have a piece of configuration telling us the version of the runtime we're using. So everything that will be defined in host JSON will be accessible through this as well. Everything that is coming from your app settings defined in app service,
Yep.
Or environment variables, they'll be surfaced through this configuration as well. So that's just one example of many services you could be consuming once this feature lights up.
That's awesome. Honestly, I'm really glad, Fabio, you joined us, because this is like, even you didn't go into this level of depth even during your session. So this is very cool for viewers and everyone else to get kind of this depth in understanding into the host. And this is awesome. Very, very cool stuff.
Sweet. Maybe we should talk about what have you been up to? Like, which features, like, you've been in, you know.
Sure. We'll do a transition here. So one that I've spent some time with our good friend Chris Gillum, the Durable Functions kind of lead dev and working on the scale controller, is for something else we announced, and it's in private preview now. I'll share the link in just a second, called the Azure Functions Premium Plan. And I know a few people watching have seen this on Twitter. They've already reached some stuff out, but I did want to explain that a little bit. So we've already talked some about hosting stuff today, how we have our consumption plan today. You can also change to your app service plan, but even Fabio, you alluded to the fact that, you know, there's some differences there. Like if you want to deploy today a function in an app service plan, it's no longer powered by our scale controller. It relies on the auto scale service to be like, hey, you have an instance that's had 80% CPU for 5 minutes. I'm going to add one more instance for you. So it's a very reactive system.
Right.
You are stuck to scale within the size of your plan. So if you have a standard app service plan and you get 10,000 events, the most you could ever scale, even after autoscale finally kicks in, is 10 instances. Whereas on the consumption plan today, we give you tons and tons and tons. Like, we'll just scale you out like crazy. We do this thing called cross-stamp scaling. It's very exciting. So while there are people and enterprises specifically who may choose the app service plan, they have to make a few trade-offs. So what we announced this week, and it's available in private preview, is the Azure Functions Premium Plan. So it's the same functions, same tooling, same everything else. But instead of the consumption plan, it's a premium plan with a few perks. You can choose a number of cores that you have reserved.
Cool. So premium, right?
I know. It sounds really better. The name's good. Way to go, marketing. I appreciate your contribution. Wow, that was a weird pronunciation. But so I could say, hey, for my workload, I want to have just one core that's reserved for me and warm all of the time. So when I first send that request, I get no cold start because I have this reserved core. What's nice, though, is that the thing that's powering those cores and those instances behind the scenes is the scale controller. It's the same thing that powers your consumption functions. You can still scale out extremely rapidly. You can scale out extremely far, but you can have better hardware. You could say, I want my instance to have 4 cores and 8 gigs of memory because I'm doing some intensive stuff. And even as we scale out, we're going to continue to warm up things in advance so that even on scale out, you're not going to hit this cold start either. So that's some nice stuff. You'll get VNet connectivity, always on for those cores. So that's kind of, I don't know if there's anything else.
So scale in and scale out is going to be as fast as our consumption plan.
That's right.
And still infinite scale as well, right?
Yeah.
So it still takes advantage. And I think one thing probably we're going to experience, which is better hardware, probably can pack a lot more in too.
Yes.
I would imagine that's dedicated to you, and you can run tons of function apps because, you know, now we run on what, 1 core, 1.5 gigs of memory, and those things are beefed up machines, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And like we were working with a customer just the other week who was like, hey, we want to make a bet on serverless, but for one reason or another, we want to have some isolated instances. We want these to be connected to our VNet. And so now there's a world where it's like, look, go set up your premium plan in an environment. Give it however many cores you think you might need. Like, hey, I want 20 of these things floating around, or scale out, scale in. And then all your developers can just start pushing to that. There could be 50, 100 apps in that plan. And to Eduardo's point, we're going to pack those really, really smart for you to give you the best of your resources and give you all those benefits of that dedicated hardware.
Just today, I mean, I think your customers are out there because just today on the session I had on use cases of serverless, D&B was with us, Dun & Bradstreet, and they were showing their architecture where they needed that isolation to talk to Dynamics and talk to their SQL DB. So what they had to do is they get an app service plan. An app service environment to set up the VNet and put the functions within that boundary. But now he doesn't have that fast scale, loud scale, and he doesn't really want it to. App service environment is a great product, but he doesn't need it. All he needs is the network isolation. So a premium plan would be perfect for a scenario like his that we presented. So we just deprecated his slides that he presented like an hour ago.
We move fast here. So yeah, I did. I just pasted the link to the sign-up form if anyone watching this is interested in signing up for that. But that's, I guess, the premium plan. So that's another cool thing.
That's an exciting one.
I
See how happy people are.
I know. There's some people, some more good questions. So we have tons of questions. We've got a few minutes left. So we'll go ahead and hit some more questions. So we'll go back to Dan, his question. So he was asking about those running triggers or timed functions. So his question was, here's what it is. This is a good question, and the right people are here. So I have a function that's running, and I publish with Visual Studio or Azure DevOps or GitHub or whatever, but I might have something that's running. So what's going to happen to those functions that are running if I have like a timer trigger or a queue trigger? Like what happens to executions when I publish an update?
Oh, that's a good question.
That was the question. So do you want to take a shot? You want me to take a shot? I'll take a shot. You want to correct me?
I'm going to judge your answer. How's that?
we have our thumbs ready to judge how your answer is going to
go. Fabio actually mentioned this a little bit earlier. When there is a configuration change, we'll restart the web host for you. And that includes a code publish. So a code publish gesture is going to tell us, look, there's new code here. We need to restart the instance for you. So that does mean that when you push code, we're going to cycle through and start to restart your instances, which does mean there's a world where you could restart an execution that was in flight. Now, depending on the trigger, it might handle that just fine. If you're using like a queue, service bus, or storage, we're going to retry that trigger based on the retry policies. You're probably going to get fine, but your code might need to know that you might have hit the same code path twice. However, if it's an HTTP trigger, it's possible that someone sent a request and mid-flight we reset that host, and they might get back like a 500 response. So this is where things like slots come in more handy, which we're doing. And we can explain a little bit of the slot status, but the ideal world is that you deploy something that's more synchronous, that you care a little bit more if it restarts to a slot, specifically HTTP slot. And then when you swap them out, it's just redirecting traffic to your slot, and you don't have to wait for that web host restart. Is that accurate, Fabio?
It is. We can probably dive a little deeper, too, into some of the behaviors when configuration changes.
We got the time. I'd love to know. Take a minute.
You talked about some of the configuration changes, right? So one of the things that we will do in some of the restart paths, we do have a graceful restart where we will allow existing work to drain out before we dispose of that job host that's no longer serving up requests. So you change the configuration, the process, the job host will begin to restart. A new one is going to spin up. You're going to have that new job host now serving up all of the new requests, starting up the listeners, processing work, while the remaining functions that we're executing will have some time to shut down before that job host is completely disposed of.
Does that work today? Like, do I have to do anything?
Today, including in V1. That's the behavior in V1 as
Great.
well. One thing that many people may not know is that you can actually ask to be notified when that happens. So as part of, in the case of C#, you can use a cancellation token. You can take that as a parameter, and you can just observe that cancellation token that gets passed in by the runtime, and that token will be signaled in the restart path, in both restart paths. And you will have some time to perform some cleanup work before the host shuts down.
So it's like 30 seconds?
I believe so. I believe we have about 30 seconds right now. I would need to confirm. But we'll give you a graceful shutdown. We'll give you some time before things are just torn down.
That's good.
To clean up and perform some additional work before things are shut down.
I'm glad you clarified too, because that's a better world.
It wasn't a clarification. Your answer was right.
You guys got it great. Both answers were fantastic. I love it.
Someone on this table is a manager. Do you have any idea which one it is? All right, we'll go another one. Let me grab one. A lot of these around Oh, okay. I'll give this one for you, Eduardo.
Sure.
ETA for PowerShell support in V2. We mentioned it. Do you have any guesstimate on when it might show up?
The great thing is it's in the works already, and you can follow the repo. So I think it's something we want to move pretty quickly. I would guesstimate with it's always a risk on those, but that would be previewing this calendar year.
Awesome. Cool.
Yep.
So there's disclaimers there, but that's a good date. All right. We'll keep going because we got plenty of these. Wagner asked a question, and by the way, props to this guy. So Wagner is joining us from New Zealand, where right now it is 6 in the morning, and he joined on at 5. So props to Wagner, and for anyone who dialed in from some crazy time zones. So are we working with the app services team to bring hybrid connection support to consumption so that there's a way to do hybrid scenarios through a consumption plan?
So I think the answer there is, so today, to clarify all the networking options, might as well tell them all. So consumption, you don't have any sort of on-prem connectivity or VNet, but on app service plan, today you can do hybrid, you can do point-to-site, and app service environment, you can add it to a VNet, you can do service endpoints and all that. A feature has been talked about here, Christina's here to talk about, is to bring the FastNIC switch to app service. So now, once they do that, you can do full isolation on your app service plan. So that will come to functions as well in the form of the premium plan. So you get this functionality there. And premium plan, like we talked about, has the scale in and scale out. Now, for that functionality to be available full in consumption, there's still other design challenges, because the challenge with consumption is you never know where your function is going to run. You don't know which VM we're going to use. Not only that, we might cross the boundary from one scale unit to the next, and how we add those machines sort of seamlessly to the VNet. So those are challenges to do this on-prem connectivity with consumption that we still want to enable them, but the more immediate plan is to bring some of these networking functionalities to app service plan and to premium functions.
Yep, good answer. Yep. So if you're looking for this in the short term, the Azure Functions Premium Plan is going to be your best bet. But it's still something, like, as you mentioned, we're going to look into that and see what can happen, but nothing really to share on that. So that's good.
I'll take good as great answer, but yeah.
All right. Here's a good one. How do you recommend doing connection pooling, for example, with MongoDB, if you're using Node in Azure Functions? Do you want me to take this one?
Yeah, you had some experience with that, right?
I have some. So, sorry, I saw a quick message. I got a little distracted. There's so many fans on YouTube right now who are loving this webcast. For real, it's been a great one. So with C#, which we've documented this really well, some people get confused because they see a single instance of a function and they expect that, like, we execute an instance and it goes away and then we execute another one on a completely new one. Yep. We actually keep your instance around on a machine for quite some time until you stop using it. So it's a best practice if you're connecting to something like SQL to do it on the top level, like as a global or a private static SQL client, and that way we can reuse that same connection across all your executions, and it gives you, so you don't exhaust your connections. Now with Node, the principle is still the same. I have done this before, but the idea is just instantiate your connection to MongoDB outside of your function method. So when we first instantiate your function code, there should be a global or some static, and static's a little bit different in the JavaScript world, but some global way for that MongoDB connection to be set up, and then just access that within your function, and we'll be able to reuse that throughout. So I have done this in JavaScript. I'm still looking for a sample. In fact, Chris Anderson, who is a much more proficient JavaScript dev than I could ever dream to be, once promised me he'd give me a sample, but he's too busy building amazing stuff for Cosmos DB now that I need to hunt him back down. But at least in principle, it does work. I've seen that work.
And those are some of the exciting scenarios for the DI stuff that we were just looking at as well. Because now, instead of just having to create a static outside of your function, just register your client, just register the connection as a service, as a singleton service, and the lifetime of that connection is going to be managed for you on that particular instance.
Yeah,
which it makes things a little easier.
Agree.
That will be the legit way of supporting that scenario.
I know. That will be the best. And then everyone's going to ask, how do I do instantiation in JavaScript? And we'll have to make Fabio figure that one out next. All right. A few more questions. Timeline around some of the configuration patterns and dependency injection. We've kind of teased this, Fabio. You don't have to make any commitments here, but if you had to float around. I mean, your wife and children miss you, I know.
I don't want to. There are a lot of
You don't
people
have to
working
give
on
any
this.
dates. You can just say no dates.
Matthew has been cranking some code out around this area. Brett has been doing a lot of work on this as well. I would say
this calendar
year, by November, we should be able to see something like this.
He said a month. It's over. Now we have to have him on the November webcast.
That's when you can tell I'm not a PM, right? But it will happen soon.
Okay.
We want to light this up soon. If it doesn't happen soon, what that means is that the feature is complete, everything works, but Jeff hasn't done the documentation.
Great. So you've kind of alluded to this too, but someone wants to know, like, of the different types of injections that I can do. Would this support scoped instances as well?
Yeah, and so that's one of the things that need to be very clear. We want to support scope instances that would be within the scope of an execution. So you have a service that is alive for the life of that invocation. Similar to the way you would perform that service registration in ASP.NET and have a service that survives for the lifetime of a request. Right now, it works with singleton services and transient registrations, but we want to make sure that scoped registrations work as well before we light this up. So that's one of the things that needs to be finished up before we call this feature done and ready to be shipped.
So it's not only Jeff that's blocking it from shipping at this point.
There's Fabio has some work to do, but I do need to work on those docs. Great questions, great answers. Fabio, I'm really glad we have you here too. Okay, so we've got time for a few more questions for those who are still around, and we've got plenty of them to go. So one question is, and we already alluded to the functions in VNet 1, premium plan is the best, or any of the app service stuff that's getting that VNet isolated networking support. One of the questions was around pricing of premium. So we didn't announce anything with pricing today.
No.
It's still in private preview. I would say what we're looking at right now is about how much a core of a premium app service plan costs is how much a core would cost in the premium plan, give or take. So if you go look at like premium plan has the lowest tier where a single instance only has one core, that's about the price we're looking at on a per use basis for the premium plan. And the note being too, because we do want this to be a premium experience, even when you have connections to on-premises resource, even when you might have heavy instantiation, we do require you to have at least one core active all of the time. So you would have some fixed base cost of that one core, but as Eduardo mentioned, we'll scale you out and scale you back in as quickly as we do in consumption, but that gives you an idea of the pricing.
But one thing for folks that are worried, because this runs on much better hardware and can pack much more in, I think it's worth those that are interested to join the preview and really test it out, like put high throughput workload on those things and compare with consumptions. And you're going to see that if you make great use of that hardware, there might be your cost effectiveness there. It's just depending how far you go in your RPS. So for heavy users, this might come up going pretty well in terms of the cost effectiveness.
Yep, great answer. And then there's just a question that says, how about Key Vault? I'm guessing that's a timing question, which that one we can answer. So the work's already done for the Key Vault stuff?
I think the first version of the feature, right, to be able to retrieve the secret, to be able to use a function app, it's probably just 1 month away. We're already Matthew demoed at the session here at Ignite. So I think what's going to be left is this feature is still more work for you to make easy for you to do secret rotations and things like that. So I think we're going to keep evolving this feature, but the first sort of incarnation of it should be just a month away.
Awesome.
Yep.
That's great. Well, that's all the questions. We had an extended webcast today. Everyone stuck around, too. So kudos to everyone who joined. This was really good. Like, honestly, Fabio and Eduardo, I'm really glad you joined today.
I wonder what's next, because, we did Channel 9 Studios is amazing. And now we're doing, this huge studio here at Ignite with 25,000 of our best friends. And so what's next?
I don't know. I don't even know where to go from here, honestly.
We're going to do the next one from our open space in the cube.
Just in the middle of Scott Guthrie's next keynote, we're just going to drop a stage and be like, welcome to Azure Functions Live.
Yep. But big thanks, everyone, for joining. I mean, we got so much feedback throughout V2. I think during our presentation, we said thank you 4 times because we really feel like it was a lot of the devs do hero work, but there was a community contribution to give us feedback throughout the process. So that was super important for us to reach the the GA of V2.
Yeah, that's a really good call out. Honestly, I wish we almost would have done that at the top of the webcast, but we have an awesome community, and we've had people who've been testing these bits on V2 for a year now, it almost seems, and giving us really good feedback, helping us know what's not working, what they'd like to see different, who tune into these webcasts, who write awesome blogs, who write awesome samples.
Absolutely.
Huge kudos.
We couldn't have done the assembly resolution work without their help.
Yeah.
Right. We got so much feedback. We got so much information from people. They were trying out bits. They were trying different scenarios that we hadn't thought of. And finding issues and helping us address those issues. So, a big thank you to everyone involved.
Yeah, I think you were both even on the webcast a few months ago where we actually said, like, hey, call to action, please send us your samples. And we got a bunch.
That's
and
true.
we documented them all, and we passed them off to Fabio, and he went through them. So, awesome community. Great.
Really
all right.
cool.
So we'll be back next month. We will be back in the Channel 9 podcast studio back in Redmond when we'll get the mics working. So be sure to mark your calendar. We'll announce a date for that shortly. But thanks, everyone, so much for joining. Keep an eye on the session recordings as they get sent out. If you have any other questions, maybe you're watching the recording of this, reach out to us on Twitter, either through the Azure Functions Twitter handle or any of ours. And thanks everyone so much for joining, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you.
Way to go.